Minnesota Vikings, one of the more fascinating drafts this year. Finished with a B+ from PFF and right middle of the pack in the composite at number 16 overall. You got some C+, you have some A's, all over the place as far as the Vikings draft. They need their own 30 for 30 on how this all happened. They start with J.J. McCarthy at pick 10. Remember, they started with pick 11. We didn't know if they were going to get up to 3. They did not. Traded up from 11 to 10 to get J.J. McCarthy, the QB out of Michigan. And then one of the biggest surprise moves in the draft, traded up from 23 to go get Dallas Turner. Gave up a lot to go get him, but the edge defender out of Alabama was their second first-round pick. Didn't pick again until round 4. Cornerback Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon, and then a whole bunch of other 6th and 7th-round picks in there for the Vikings.
So there were quite a lot of trades in this draft, and the thing that seemed to differentiate the Vikings from other teams is they were willing – there were a lot of trades that were just pick swaps. Like Buffalo seemed to make a whole series of trades that didn't actually cost them or anybody else any picks. They just moved around.
Yeah, they'd move up 30 or move up 50 or move up 80.
And that seemed to be a trend this year. People didn't seem to be actually giving up that many picks. They were just trading picks and shifting around the value of them. The Vikings seemed to make, when they made their trades, they seemed to be the team giving up draft picks specifically.
Well, so then the report on what they wanted to give up to go get New England was to go to pick 3 with New England was 11, 23, the 2 first-rounders, and then next year's first. And then it said other pick swaps that were in the Vikings' favor. And when I read that, I was thinking that might be the thing that held them down. New England was probably thinking, hey, if we're going to do this, it's got to be 3 firsts, and we're not doing pick swap stuff, right? That's it. It felt like the pick swaps kept Minnesota from getting up to 3. And then when they made their other moves, to your point, they weren't pick swapping.
No. They seem to be happy enough to give up draft picks in a way other teams didn't seem to. So with the first trade they made, right, they jump up from 11 to 10 just to secure J.J. McCarthy, right? So that one cost them – so they gave up pick number 129 and pick number 157, and they got back pick number 203 in that. So that cost them 1 pick that felt like it probably could have been achieved without giving that up, and let's just move around. Let's just swap a 3rd for a 4th or whatever. Anyway, they gave up 1 pick in that part, but that's a relatively fine move. Like, they were in this situation where we're post-draft. It's all spin at this point. Who knows what's real and what's not, and what's just let's make ourselves look good so that we don't get criticized. It does seem like the Vikings effectively liked 2 quarterbacks significantly in this draft, Drake May and J.J. McCarthy. And they tried to get to 3 to get to Drake May and couldn't get that done. And when they didn't, McCarthy became the guy. And, they were disciplined enough to wait that out, but not all the way. Let's, we'll get him to 10 and then okay, fine. Great. Let's get it done. So they make the trade. They get to 10. They give up a mid-round, low-round pick. Fine. It's cool. The next trade is the interesting one. It's the Dallas Turner pick where they go from number 23 to number 17, and they give up a 5th rounder this year and a 3rd rounder in 2025. And that's it, right? Just those 2 picks?
Is there a 4th in there too?
I thought there was another pick in there as well, but I don't see it. Yes, and a 4th rounder. Wait, what? This is reported. This is our own chat. Can't keep things straight. Let me find out what it actually was.
I'll say this. One of the things that we learned, at least 2 teams that we know of liked Drake May probably more than J.J. McCarthy. And at least 1 team liked Michael Penix Jr. more than J.J. McCarthy. So the Patriots certainly liked Drake May more than McCarthy. And the Giants, reportedly, were going to trade up only for May, did not trade up, and did not choose McCarthy. So they liked May more than McCarthy. And then the Falcons obviously liked Michael Penix Jr. more than J.J. McCarthy. So for some teams, J.J. McCarthy, he falls to QB5 in this draft. I think, again, if you were to say what was the consensus on J.J., it was despite all the rumors, they're going to pick him at 2. They loved his interviews. QB 4 or 5 was J.J. McCarthy.
So it cost them the 5th rounder this year and then a 2025 3rd and 4th rounder.
3rd and 4th,
so that is right.
I'm sorry. That's a massive haul.
Yes.
It's a massive haul to, again, move up 6 spots. So you're giving up whoever you could have picked at 23, plus next year's 3rd and 4th, plus a 5th. The 3rd and 4th is you read off what 3rd rounders look like earlier today. Those are, a Cooper Beebe could be a starter. Those are starting caliber players in a lot of cases. Not all the time, but they're 20 to 25-30% starter rate.
So their draft next year currently looks like a first rounder, and then their next pick is in the 5th round. So 2 5th-rounders, a 6th, and 2 7s. Now
they're going to get the Cousins comp picks.
Yeah, they're going to get a 3rd round back for Cousins signing with Atlanta.
Danielle Hunter.
I don't think they're getting that. Somebody said that's been canceled out by Grenard or whatever.
Probably.
Like that doesn't. I'm not sure they're getting that one back, or maybe it becomes a much lower pick. But the 3rd rounder seems pretty set in stone. So minimum, that's probably factored into their evaluation process. We're giving away a 3rd next year. We're going to get a 3rd back. Let's call that a wash. And then the other factor here that Vikings fans point to all the time, though I'm not 100% convinced how relevant it is, they're going to have an absolute boatload of salary cap space next year. So they can bolster this roster in free agency, not necessarily going after, whoever the alpha name is next year, but just getting a whole bunch of depth players and paying for them. Fine. It's generally not a smart way to build a team, but it's definitely a factor. Like they're considering it. They're aware of it.
Any team that has reset and now has the rookie contract quarterback probably has that level of flexibility, and that's where Minnesota is. So it's an interesting offseason because they've moved on from Cousins, given themselves the cap flexibility, already started spending a little bit more. They did get a guy. They did get a quarterback in JJ, and then the Dallas Turner move. I just want to discuss that a little bit more because the fit for Minnesota, I think, is a really good one. With Brian Flores' defense, we talked a lot last year about Flores doing the rush 3 at an extremely high rate and blitz 6 or more at a high rate. I felt like that was out of necessity, right? Like they had Danielle Hunter and no one else rushing the passer, and they had to do something at the extreme ends just to create indecision by the quarterback, create pressure on the quarterback. And now I don't think they have to do that nearly as much with Jonathan Grenard and with Dallas Turner. I don't think Dallas Turner's an elite pass rusher, but he'll be solid.
He's good, though.
He's a good player.
And
then Andrew Van Ginkel. And both Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner are guys who have played in systems where they've had seasons where they've dropped into coverage 200-plus times.
Yeah.
So Flores has that level of flexibility, 3 edge defenders to rotate around and create some more indecision on the quarterback while also maybe having a better pure 4-man rush.
One thing that I don't know has been talked about as much as maybe it should, maybe just by us, but maybe also by other people, is I think Dallas Turner actually has a lot more room to grow because he is relatively one-dimensional in terms of his pass rush. Like, certainly when you compare him to Latu in terms of the sheer variety of moves and the number of ways they have to win, Turner's not even in the same ballpark, but he gets by with athleticism and being really good at his 1 or 2 tricks. So if you can actually develop a couple more moves to his game, his upside is really, really good because he's very good at what he already does and he's a special athlete. But it becomes it's a more high stakes version of the conversation we had with Detroit, half a dozen picks later, which is they've identified this guy who was most popularly mocked at number 8 overall to the Falcons. People assumed he was gone top 10. There's no way Dallas Turner is going to be here. And suddenly Minnesota's sitting there at 23 with a guy who presumably they have ranked as maybe the best defender in the draft, or certainly one of the best edge rushers, and is like within sight, right? A guy that was supposed to be gone long before they were picking. They're sitting there at 23, 17 comes up. They're like, we could make that happen. Like we could get to 17 to make this happen. I mean, Kevin O'Connell was like shocked when they told him that they're getting Turner. They're going up for Turner. Like it clearly was not on the radar of things that could have possibly happened for them. Now, you then have the same conversation with Detroit. It's not insignificant. They've given up a 3rd and a 4th next year and a 5th this year. So 3 extra picks to go make this happen. Those are not without consequence. Like those are 3 players that could have made an impact. But it's how you weigh that versus what you think Dallas Turner actually is. And then you've pushed back on this in the past. I generally think there's some merit to combining moves and looking at them as a kind of composite. Like I thought there was some value to that last year with Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. If you put it together and say, this is what they got in the aggregate and this is what it cost them in the aggregate, right? You're kind of okay with it. You're more okay with it than you are just focusing in the one move for the non-quarterback. The Vikings, the same thing, right? The J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner combined as their – remember, everyone assumed 11 and 23, it's going to get packaged for a quarterback. That's why they did it. They end up actually using both those picks and coming away with 2 players. And Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap effectively added it all up and said they gave up the equivalent of the number 4 overall pick, which was actually one of the most common mock drafts, right? We go 1, 2, 3, QB, 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 and then Minnesota trades up to number 4 and they get their guy, J.J. McCarthy. Well, they got their guy, J.J. McCarthy, and they got Dallas Turner for the equivalent of that trade that was supposed to get them to number 4 overall, right? If you look at it in those terms,
you're saying that they used the number 4 overall pick.
I'm saying they gave up draft capital equivalent to the number 4 overall pick, which they also would have done if they traded up to get to number 4 overall. Only this way they ended up with Dallas Turner
with 2 players,
in addition to the player they were supposed to get at number 4 overall. So in those terms, this is good business. But if you look at it just in the Dallas Turner thing, then it's a much more difficult argument to make because it's packaging 3 players and that 23 overall for Dallas Turner.
No, I get both sides of it. If you said you're going to tell Minnesota before the draft, you're going to have J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner on your roster at the end of the day, that would have sounded crazy.
And not just for the Vikings, but to other people. Like if you'd said, hey, this trade that they're making, like everyone's trading. The Vikings are going up to 4, they're going up to 5, whatever it is, they're trading to that area to get J.J. McCarthy, right? If you told people they were going to do that and get Dallas Turner, they're like, that doesn't make any sense. That's ridiculous. There's no way that happens.
No way that would ever happen.
And that's exactly what they did. Now, you can then quibble that it's been costly. They've shorn themselves of all their mid-round picks for 2 drafts.
Yeah, the quibble for me would be, okay, the draft started to happen and you dodged a bullet, so to speak, and you only had to trade from 11 to 10 to get J.J. McCarthy. That's already been established. Then on top of that, Kwesi's probably going in with this mindset, we're going to be working with limited draft capital because we got to go get a guy. Now the world has changed. Dallas Turner's dropping. But now you're debating, what can I get at 17 to go? I'm going to 17 to get Turner, or I could sit at 23. I will say, if the Vikings felt like, first off, Turner's a top 10 player, and then secondly, we'd really like to get an edge rusher, and presumably they don't see the same fit as a Jared Verse or a Chop Robinson.
Right.
Those dudes came off the board quickly. If Minnesota waited to 23, probably no doubt none of those guys are available. If they really needed to get an edge rusher. Now, again, I'm of the mindset that you're not going to sit here and be like, I need to get an edge rusher, got to go get him. But I think the one thing I will say, what I used to think before we realized maybe not everybody's great at evaluating players and you should trust consensus more, was in all the draft charts, what if you put your player evaluations into your draft charts and said, well, like in a vacuum, trading up this trade is a bad trade, but if I have a variable that says, well, it's Dallas Turner, he's number 8 on the consensus board, that's different than trading up for, say, Brian Thomas Jr., who is 25th on the consensus board. I do think those things should factor in. So in a vacuum, the Vikings lose that trade 66% of the time. Or the Jags are feeling great about that trade, right? They dropped 6 spots, still probably got the guy they would have drafted and picked up 3 draft picks. But the Vikings could probably, I wonder if they're justifying it by saying, I'm putting the value of the player I'm going to get in there. Right or wrong, they're doing it. And in their own models, that's the thing that's balancing it out. Because in every other model, it's unbalanced.
But there's also this idea, like not every position, like you've made this point before, that there does appear to be quite a strong historical drop-off once you get clear of the top edge rusher prospects, right? You get those guys, they go in the first round generally quite high. And then we assume there's this next wave that comes in the second round. We just go to the next guys. And there's actually quite a crappy track record of those guys. So if you are Minnesota and you want an edge rusher and suddenly Dallas Turner is within striking distance, you're like, well, dude, we could get that guy. It'll cost us a couple of draft picks. Or we stay pat at 23, hope Chop Robinson or Jared Verse is still there. But if neither of those things happen and we're down to the Chris Braswells and the Adisa Isaacs of the world, history tells us that's a bad place to be in, right? So there's justification there. There's also that's kind of connected to the Julio Jones trade from way back when. Like if you look at that draft, it went AJ Green, Julio Jones, and then here endeth the wide receivers, right? So that's always relevant to these trades. Like what is left in this draft once you get clear of these players?
The opposite of that, real quick, was like the Bills trading up for Sammy Watkins when Mike Evans and OBJ were sitting right there. That's the danger in it. And again, how do you definitively know that ahead
And
of
then
time?
the last element here is the one thing that they did protect with these trades and the mid-round picks is they still have next year's first.
Yeah.
Which was a big part of any, like if they wanted to go to 3, it was going to cost them next year's first.
Right.
A lot of teams, the Saints, have done this regularly, right? If you're trading up in the first round, it might cost you next year's first. So that's one thing they have done. Okay, everything else is from pick 5 and beyond. They got the third back for the Cousins thing, but they have got next year's first still intact.
I mean, if you do compound that strategy with we're going to take next year's first and we're going to continue to trade down and flip that into 4 more picks, I think you can combat this a little bit. So look, that's where like the part of me that softened on the Will Anderson trade, and the thing I would push back on you, this is not the Will Anderson trade, because the Texans had pick number 2. They didn't have to, or they always had pick number 2. They always had the ability to get C.J. Stroud. And even though you could say, well, we got C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson for these picks. Well, no, you started with pick 2. You always had it, and you traded 3 pretty high picks for 1 Will Anderson. The point that I would say that you made about Turner, Will Anderson is a blue at edge, and that's the thing that I would justify it and say I feel as strongly on Will Anderson as any other prospect, and I can buy into that. But you also have to weigh that against 3 other potential starters.
That's where it's the same, though. Like so, obviously, in each case, the team was taking the quarterback with their first sort of option. You know what I mean? Like, because they could have taken Dallas Turner at number 11, right? The way the draft fell. That if they thought that highly of Dallas Turner, they could have just drafted him at 11 or traded to 10 to get him, you know? But you were always going to go with quarterback because obviously everyone recognizes that's the most important thing. But where both teams, I think, felt the same was once they got their quarterback, they got greedy and they felt strongly enough about the edge rusher that they had to get him as well. So the Texans were like, Will Anderson might be the best defensive player in this draft. We want him as well. We can make it happen. All it's going to cost us. It's going to cost us next year's first round pick to do it. It's worth it. He's that good. And so far they've been proved correct. The Vikings seem to have felt effectively the same way about Dallas Turner. It's a different draft. It's a different dynamic, but they're looking at him saying, he's a blue. He's on the sheet. He's a blue. He might be the best defensive player in this draft. And suddenly we can get him. It's going to cost us a few mid-round picks, but we're coming out of this draft with a dude that we didn't think there was any shot at getting, and he's suddenly available. So I think from that perspective, it's the same idea, right? You can look at it and say they got a bit greedy. They gave up a bit too much. But the counter to that is they got a player that they think is, a top couple of player, a blue chip prospect, and one of the top ex-players in this entire draft. And then, as I say, when you look at it as a composite, as a whole, you can put it together with the quarterback deal and say, this is actually a fair amount to come away with both these players.
Anything else on the Vikings draft?
Well, that was just their first round.
Yeah. I'm rooting for the storylines. I think the Falcons Penix storyline, the Vikings storyline, these are fascinating things to watch. I liked Kyrie Jackson in the 4th. No one else beyond that stands out to me to comment on.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you didn't like anybody else.
Oh, I like Levi Drake Rodriguez from Texas A&M Commerce as a 7th round pick 232.
Nice.
Do you have anything else on the Vikings?
No, I mean, I think, Kyrie Jackson is the big extra pick of that group. But they had an interesting undrafted group.
And then I want to respond to something in the chat after that.
2 players that I think are worth mentioning from their undrafted haul. Number one, they typically bring in a lot of guys. They've done that again. They brought in Dwight McGlothern, the Arkansas cornerback. I know Dalton in the day 3 talk or the day 3 coverage was talking up a lot.
He was 175 on the consensus board. I thought he'd go day 3.
And then they brought in, for the second straight year, a fairly well-regarded edge rusher, this time Gabriel Murphy from UCLA.
Oh, I love Gabriel Murphy. I really thought he was going to get drafted.
I'm actually shocked he went undrafted. That's an absolute steal as an undrafted free agent.
I'll say it. He's a data blue. He's a blue in the data.
Based off a round of what?
I mean, he was at 117 on the consensus.
Right.
So he was a guy
that's like a 4th round. He's a blue.
I'll say this, for the second straight year, last year a blue, meaning I would have taken him in the 4th round if he was available, if I trusted my board. The same thing was true of Ivan Pace Jr. last year, who the Vikings brought in. My board would have said, take Ivan Pace Jr. in the 4th. It's saying the same thing about Gabriel Murphy, the UCLA edge. The real only knock on him is he's a 30.5-inch arms. And, Kyle Van Noy and George Selvey are the only recent NFL players with any level of, playing time with 30.5-inch arms rushing off the edge.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute steal. I mean, like you said, your board says from the 4th round on, you would be happy to draft that guy, and he would be a blue prospect in the model. And the Vikings bring him in as an undrafted free agent. That's crazy.